Alrighty, let's get going here. Finish up our content for the course. It'll be fantastic. All right. Oh. Okay, so we were talking last time about youth and religion, and we got a couple of slides left to go. Hang on. Yeah, so we ended off kind of with this, looking at, the reasons that young people are saying, Gen Z specifically, they're not turning to religious practice or religious communities. My pen is dead. No. Okay. I don't know what's happening. I'm so sad. All right. Well, oh, there it is. It lives. All right. So, let's pick up here. All right. So, the values gap, right? So, in terms of what young people say they value versus what they think their religious communities value, you can see that there are basically double-digit gaps, and mostly in the mid to high 20s in terms of what young people say they value and what they think their religious communities care about, right? So obviously they think they care much more about LGBTQ rights, gender equality, immigration rights, income inequality, disability rights than their communities do. Now this is, this bottom green line isn't what their communities say, this is what they think their communities say. But you see across the board, right, except for gun reform, apparently, and Black Lives Matter, everything is above 20%. So young people apparently think that, the religious communities that they're a part of care about different things than they do. Okay. So, back to this question of flourishing or kind of life outcomes that I talked about, a few times over the last couple of weeks. One of the things that's pretty consistent in the data is that obviously, the more religious parts of the cohort seem to do better in some ways. Now, this is the way that Springtide asked these questions. It's, as you can see, it's not nearly as robust as, say, the way Smith and Denton and then Smith and Snell did it in the National Study of Youth and Religion, right? Yeah, please, sorry.
Just a quick question with the last slide.
Sure, I'll go back.
How accurate is the discrepancy between what the actual church thinks versus...
Without actually surveying the religious communities, there's no way to really know. I think what's important, though, is that they see and believe that they care about different things, right? So that there is a gap in what they perceive as important and what they think their communities perceive as important. So there's a big kind of, they perceive a misalignment of their values versus their communities, right? Sorry, I know that doesn't answer the question, but yeah, without actually digging in, there'd be no way to know. Yeah, Jessica, sorry.
Wondering, where was this data collected? Is it American?
So this is American. This is 3,500. Sorry, it's 3,500 young people aged 13 to 25. Yeah, in the U.S., and this was done in 2022. This data comes out of 2022, so it's recent-ish. Okay. Right. So same kind of study. Basically, they asked, people whether they were young people whether they were flourishing a lot in various kinds of settings, right? So of the young people who say they're flourishing a lot, right, and they split the sample here, and it's a bit of an odd one because there's going to be a lot of a big middle ground of those moderately religious people that's not represented in the way they're presenting their data, which I wish they were being more robust with it and more transparent, but this is the way they chose to present the data. And I think it still tells an interesting story, though, I don't think a complete one. Well, I mean, what you can see, though, is basically, young people who say they're flourishing a lot, so you've got your very religious in dark blue, you're not religious in light blue, and the disparity in orange, which I like the disparity thing. It's a clever way of visualizing the data. And you can see, right, in terms of people who say they're flourishing a lot, there are basically, pretty decent double-digit disparities across the board, right? That, in terms of romantic relationships, the very religious, more of them, though still a minority, say they're flourishing a lot. In friendships, it's a bare minority, right? just below 50%. In family relationships, they seem to be doing better. Relationships with trusted adults, better, though I don't think that's a great number. And the same thing, at work, a 20% gap. At home, which is, our only plurality kind of here, right? Or majority, 51% say they're thriving at home, a huge gap of 22%. In finances, physical wellness, again, like a 22% gap in physical wellness, which I think lines up interestingly with some of that National Study of Youth and Religion data, right? They're happier, they feel healthier, all of those things. In mental health, right? A huge gap, 24%, with only 18% of the not religious at all, saying that they're flourishing a lot in their mental health, which, is a bit concerning. And online life is an interesting one too. There could be a whole unit on this, just talking about online life and how religion plays with it. There's a lot of research. I haven't read all of it, but there's an interesting kind of component there. But just the kind of takeaway is it looks again like those who say that they are very religious are doing better across pretty much every measure that we have here, right? They seem to think that they're doing better. Anyway, yeah, Jessica.
For the flourishing of mental health, could we argue that, because there's this one study that the more, self-examined a person is, the higher likely to, depression and whatnot, because it's you're examining everything in your life, so it's I can't trust anything, so it leaves a weird disparity. But if you have religion, you're I can't trust everything, but I can trust this at least.
Interesting. That would be an interesting hypothesis to test across the data. You'd have to look at it in terms of time spent in reflection. This would be an interesting study. That would be your H1 in an interesting study, right? It'd be hypothesis 1. Religious people have less self-examined lives. Is that kind of what you're?
Sort of.
Yeah.
I don't need to examine these parts of myself because the church says these parts are already figured out. So why do I have to think about it?
And I don't know that I can make a hypothesis based on the data that I have here, or any of the data that I've seen, even from National Study of Youth and Religion. But yeah, that'd be an interesting one to go. You'd have to do a whole new study and gather a whole bunch of new data, but that would be an interesting hypothesis 1 to sort of test against it. I should re-download the data set for National Study of Youth and Religion and see if I could play around with it. But we have no time. The course is ending. It's an interesting hypothesis, but I'm not sure. Okay, good. Okay, so this is probably, I would say, the last big concept of the course, and it's the one that I think is the most cool. Well, not in the whole course, but I really love this concept. It's a really, really interesting one. As part of this kind of, some of the work that's done by Springtide, and this came out in their 2021 report, they proposed basically what they call, or that Gen Z is constructing its religious identity in a way that's quite different from previous generations, right? And what they called it, and so this is Josh Packard, who was running Springtide at the time. He's moved on now, which is too bad because I think he did a good job. Termed it Faith Unbundled. And I mean, they published an article, and it was titled Spotify as a Religious Metaphor. But basically, what they were getting at, right, is that, top 5 meaningful activities that young people say bring fulfillment in their lives, right? Listening to music, spending time with friends, spending time with family, caring for pets, being outdoors. None of those are kind of explicitly religious. But what Packard says, is that basically faith unbundled is this idea that young people are constructing their faith identities by taking, basically elements, such as belief, identity, practices, and community from a variety of religious and non-religious sources rather than from one tradition, right? So rather than, back in the day, maybe not that long ago, people tended to say, turn on the radio, right? And they would listen to one type of music, right? They'd tune into the country station, and that's the music they would listen to. They would get sort of a prepackaged kind of genre of music. Today, right, obviously with Apple Music and Spotify and all of those services, basically people pick and choose whatever songs happen to resonate with them, and they build their own playlists. And Packard is essentially suggesting that religion has for young people, has become that same sort of thing. Rather than, say, getting your package of meaning from Catholicism or from Islam or from, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you kind of accept the whole package, the young people are, hang on, I'm going to highlight this because it's important. I know you love it when I highlight stuff. That they're combining elements and beliefs from a variety of religious and non-religious sources, right? So they're putting this together in really kind of interesting and unusual ways. I got to talk to Packard about this. It was really an interesting, very, very short discussion in like an online kind of session that he was doing. I'll tell you a couple things that I thought were really, really interesting. I asked him, for one, like, is this just, this sounds like, a hodgepodge, a sort of mush of a whole bunch of different things. Is this moralistic therapeutic deism? Are you just repackaging Smith and Denton's concept and, basically calling it something different? And he said, no. Okay, he said he doesn't like the concept of moralistic therapeutic deism for lots of reasons. But the big difference, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting, is that he said the thing that he always hated about moralistic therapeutic deism as a concept that never resonated with his experience of young people was that it makes religion sound really easy, right? That it's like, young people have this really easy breezy sort of relationship with religion. It's there when they need it, but mostly they don't care that much, and God is just off, at the edge of the universe doing his thing until you need him, and then he shows up. And what Packard said is that, the Springtide data and a lot of the work that he's done has suggested that actually for young people, religion is really hard, right? And they actually put a lot of work into it in figuring out what they actually believe. It's not that they don't care and they're kind of breezy in the way that moralistic therapeutic deism suggests, but actually that they're working a lot harder, but they're combining things in ways that we just sort of never anticipated, because we're used to thinking of religious and spiritual beliefs in these packaged kind of systems. And Packard said that's just not how Gen Z in particular thinks about it. And I love his kind of surprise, because he said what he was expecting was that it would be, either tarot cards or the rosary, right? That you would actually have to pick actively between these two practices. But what it actually turned out that Gen Z was doing was a sort of both and, right? Instead of an either or, it's like they were using tarot cards and they were praying the rosary. They were using something like centering prayer combined with, Protestantism, centering prayer from Buddhism combined with Protestantism, right? They were basically picking and choosing those spiritual and religious practices that work for them, right? Rather than taking it as a package deal from a particular institution, right? So they don't rely on a single institution to make sense of their identity. And here, religion is not a closed system, but an open system that flows in and out of other systems, science, ecology, socialization, politics, right? So some of these ideas, they were taking things into their spirituality that were sometimes not even religious, right? They were, maybe mindfulness kind of practices from contemporary pop psychology and these kinds of things, right? So it's a very open system and not a closed one. So they've sort of like unbundled what it means to be a spiritual Gen Zer from specific religious traditions. They may still belong to them and take elements from them, but they're not afraid to kind of mix and match. Okay, I think that's okay. I'll try to go through this really quickly. It is interesting, but I feel like I could never do justice to this in the time I have. Okay, so 4 kind of elements that we can talk about unbundling, right? So unbundling a belief from a single source or system, right? What Packard says is, in a lot of ways, whoa, that's a red highlighter. I didn't want that. I want the pen. Give me my pen back. Thank you. Thank you. So basically, right, they're taking, it looks like young people who turn to many or various sources when making meaning and discerning what to believe about right, wrong, purpose, calling, salvation, suffering, right? So Packard says this looks like curiosity, right? Gen Z lives in a very pluralistic world, and they're very curious, right? And they're not bound into that single religious system that we often think of religion as being, right? They're actually going to look at what works, what's interesting, what they find appealing. They're curious about other religious systems. Maybe that's why I got the rate my professor rating, that I didn't talk about, enough various religious beliefs. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Right. What does it look like to unbundle identity from a single structure? He says it looks like wholeness, and specifically, right, he says that Gen Z has this real focus on authenticity, on being their authentic selves. And, in the past, there might have been this, or there was definitely this sort of religious stress on opening up or closing down those parts of yourself that didn't fit into a particular religious system, right? If you were, whatever, LGBTQ and Catholic, right, you'd have to sacrifice the LGBTQ for the Catholic part or something like that, right? And what Packard is saying is that increasingly for Gen Z, right, they're not willing to put themselves into those boxes that we've always thought of religion as being, because they want to bring their whole selves to everything, right? Authenticity is incredibly important to Gen Z. Being their authentic selves is incredibly important. So they're not going to sacrifice a part of what they think makes them them for some broad religious system. So wholeness is important. Yeah, this one I think is interesting. I don't know, if you work with young people at all, this is probably something you want to take into account. And I mean, I know like probably 20 of you are going to send me emails next year asking for referrals so you can get into like a counseling program of some kind, because that's how it goes. I've got like 5 of them sitting in my inbox right now. You're like, ooh, I hope. Anyway, all right. So what does this look like, right? What does Packard mean here? Basically, what he's saying is that young people basically are going to show up, right, where they think there's personal relationships that exist, or new ones are possible, right? But Gen Z is, weirdly, though deinstitutionalized, are highly relational, and they value relationships in major and important ways, right? They want to participate in communities where those relationships exist, right? And even if they have long-term associations with communities, if they don't have those kinds of open, personal, trusted relationships, they are not going to show up, right? So, I mean, this is a conversation I've had with like pastors at churches, right? Who are like, well, you have looked at the literature on youth and religion. How do we get them into the building? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong question, right? It's like getting them into the building is an old model, right? It's like, how do we get people to come to us? It's like, you got to go out and build relationships with them where they are, and then they might show up. They might not. It depends on how you do it, right? But you're fundamentally kind of asking the wrong question. Right? If they feel like there's a possibility of a relationship, or they have existing relationships, that's where they show up. All right. And then flexibility, right? This is an interesting one. Unbundling practices, right? How you do spirituality. Yeah, I mean, basically, it is a built-to-suit kind of spiritual religious system, right? And this is why, and I should pull it up. I forgot to pull it up. This is why Costco is stocking, now tarot cards and Reiki crystals, right? Because, basically young people are combining practices of different religions in ways that make sense to them, the current questions they're facing, and what those look like. So Packard says this looks like flexibility, right? They're flexible in their spiritual and religious thinking because they've, unbundled, spirituality and faith from particular systems, right? So it's not like they're not going to adopt, say, Catholicism wholesale likely. They're going to take practices from all over the place in most cases. Okay, how are we doing with that? Good? All right. That was the end of this one. Keep my doodles. I have one more. No questions. I have no time. No, yes, go ahead, please. But I'm going to pull up the other one while I go.
Also 1 minute or the final?
This is like 10 minutes, so don't worry that much about it.
I just wanted to know if this therapeutic theism doesn't fit with like Gen Z, how
So
thought it.
So specifically, like this is specifically Packard suggesting this. I mean, what he sees in the data is young people who are actually wrestling with questions of religion and spirituality in major ways, right? And he thinks they're actually working really hard, right? It's like by exploring, like, okay, what do I think about tarot and Reiki and the rosary and centering prayer? You know, they're actually working really hard to create their own system. And that isn't, in his opinion, and I think he's probably right, characteristic of people who take religion really lightly. It's just, it looks so different from previous generations, right? Where it was like, I'm Catholic, and that was all, and you just adopted Catholicism as a box, right? And it's like, well, okay, I'm Catholic, so I know that that means I go to Mass on Sunday, I pray the rosary, I take communion, and all of this kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah, please.
So is MCD more like millennials and freedom is more Gen Z or
I think, you know, the way I've always split it is that millennials probably were more in this MTD kind of mode, right? And that Gen Z has kind of broken out of that into a much more active kind of posture towards these questions. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. It's about the future. Let's do the future really quick. Okay. The future of religion in 20 minutes. 24 minutes. I'm sure none of these predictions will prove to be wrong. All right, so I'm going to go back to my friends at Pew Research. So by 2050, so what's the world going to look like by 2050? And I refuse to go out any further than 2050 because even these predictions are going to be wrong. So what is the world going to look like by 2050? And okay, I say, my second point. The modeling is going to be inaccurate, right? Something is going to be different. And I say this specifically because if you had looked at the modeling for religion in 1990 in the US, nobody would have predicted that, a quarter of the population would now identify as no religion or nothing in particular, right? That wasn't on the map. So there's always new trends that appear and things that change. And we are bad at predicting things, as I've said before. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Okay, but if we kind of follow Pew's suggestions, right, 2050, Christianity will still be the largest religion in the United States, with about 2/3 of Americans identifying as Christian, right? Now again, the landscape is going to change, right? By 2050, the baby boomers will be completely off the board. Gen X will be quite old. Millennials, Gen Z, and we're going to have a couple of new generational cohorts, right? Generation Alpha, because we just go back to the beginning of the alphabet, apparently, or whatever we end up calling them, and probably just the beginning points of whatever comes after Generation Alpha, Generation Beta, I guess, or Bravo, who knows. But so the landscape's going to look a lot different, but Pew thinks, you're probably going to still see about 2/3 Christian, and about a quarter, a little bit over a quarter, nothing in particular. And the rest, to be honest, is just change, right? Everybody else is just sort of like, the little bit of spare change in your pocket. And one of the things that Pew predicts is that the growth of the non-religious, right, the unaffiliated, is probably going to slow considerably after about 2030. Okay. So the world, okay, that's America. The world in 2050, what does the world in 2050 look like? The world in 2050, and I'll say, probably vindicating Stark in the triumph of faith, still looks pretty religious, right? According to this forecast. And again, lots of stuff can change. Take it all with a grain of salt. But basically, by 2050, right, the population estimated somewhere, I think, around 9.3 billion. Virtually 3 billion of whom are Christian, and just shy of 3 billion of whom are Muslim, right? So Islam and Christianity are going to continue to be the dominant world religions. Their numbers are both going to basically rise, numerically, right? So Christians will go from 2.17 to 2.92 billion, and Muslims will go from about 1.6 billion today to about 1.7, 1.8 billion, or sorry, 2.7, 2.8 billion in 2050. The unaffiliated, right, are going to stay roughly flat. They're going to add, there's about 1.13 billion of them today, and in 2050, Pew thinks there's going to be about 1.23 billion of them. They'll be outpaced by Hindus, and then again, the rest is just sort of spare change, right? The Jews down there at the bottom, so small. Okay. In terms of percentage of the global population, right, Christians will still be number one in 2050, and most forecasts suggest that Islam may surpass Christianity in around somewhere between 2070 and 2100 as the world's largest religion. But up to 2050, right, Christianity will still maintain its lead, although by a much slimmer margin, right? Today it's about 31.4%. It should stay about there according to Pew, though Islam will go from 23% to about 30% in 2050. The unaffiliated, as you can see, are going to drop, to roughly 13.2 from about 16.4% by 2050, and the rest is all kind of mostly declines in percentages of global population, as other religions don't grow in the same way. Okay. Yeah, and smaller religions will mostly fail to keep pace with global population growth and therefore decline as a total percent of the population, except for the Jews at the bottom, who are going to just keep up with global population to remain at 0.2% of the world's population. Okay, the nuns, right? The nuns are unaffiliated globally. Probably, because non-religious people, and I'll show you, sorry, I have a graph here. The unaffiliated, right, their total fertility rate is about 1.7 children per woman, which is below that magical replacement number, which is right about here, which is 2.1, right? They have relatively low fertility. Now, I actually suspect, and I think I'm safe in saying this, that this number is going to go down. And I suspect that, so this was a couple of years ago from Pew, this was in 2019. I suspect that the number today is probably closer to 1.4, given all the stuff I've seen, so it's declining. Okay, anyway, total fertility rates. I spent like a few hours looking at total fertility rates around the world a few days ago, and it left me feeling very depressed. The nuns, all right. Because they tend to have fewer children, right? And the total fertility rate for the non-religious is considerably lower. The continued growth for the nuns is essentially predicated on cannibalizing people from religious groups. It's mostly happening in the West, right? We do see it some other places in the world, but it seems to be mostly happening in kind of the West. So they're going to grow by 2050, in terms of total numbers, right, by about 0.1 billion, but they're going to fail to keep up with, the 35% increase that is, estimated by 2050. I actually also think this number is wrong, but whatever. My recent review of total fertility rates suggests that's probably not going to happen. But, okay, nevertheless, I'm like, and you're like, but is that my computer telling me the battery is low? I don't know why it made that sound, but my battery's fine. Wait. Still streaming. Okay, I think we're good. I don't know what happened. All right. Here, right, same kind of charts, right, just showing like numbers in 2010 versus what they think the numbers will be in 2050, and the growth numerically, right? So Christians will add just like 750 million, basically. Muslims adding 1.16 billion. And, again, while growing by 99 million, still slow for the unaffiliated, still a slower pace overall than total population growth. Alrighty. I already doodled on this slide. How fun. You can just see, right, the differences, and so let me underline this because it's important. This has been long sort of understood that the future belongs to whatever group is the most fertile, right, in terms of how many babies they have. And if you are a Buddhist, things look grim. If you are other religion, things look grim. And if you're unaffiliated, right, things look grim because, well, you're maybe not that far off that 2.1 number. What you can see is that, basically Muslims and Christians have pretty high total fertility rates, right, well above replacement. So they are going to grow if no intervening social forces jump in. Versus, Jews and Hindus, still good. I actually suspect this Jewish number is actually going to go up because total fertility in Israel in the last few years has jumped above 3. Nevertheless, the Jews could have 15 babies per woman, and they would still be a tiny group because there's so few of them today. But, I guess if they had 15 children per woman, they would grow quickly. But anyway, that's not the point. The future, in a sense, looks more religious, right? Because religious people, especially in, Africa, Asia, Pacific Islands, the Middle East, are having more children. So their percentage of the global population is going to continue to grow. All right. I tried to get an AI to generate a stained glass image of Rodney Stark for me, but apparently it will not do known figures. I can get it to make Jesus play squash and eat a pastrami sandwich. I have both of those and Thai food. Why? Because I was playing around with it. And I have Jesus giving a high five to Constantine, which it did as a Byzantine icon, which is kind of awesome. But I couldn't get it to give me Rodney Stark as a stained glass window, unfortunately, so I made my own. Okay, so I have to give at least a little bit more to Rodney Stark before sort of concluding with some Christian Smith, because I have to give Rodney one last word in the course. Otherwise, why did I pray to my Rodney Stark shrine this morning? All right, so Stark, looking at this specific Pew kind of estimate and lots of other estimates, he doesn't think that Islam will ever actually pass Christianity, specifically because, and he thinks Pew is wrong. He hated Pew, and always thought they were wrong. But specifically, he thought that Muslim population growth was already slowing. And this I can confirm, again, as I recently sort of went through total fertility rates. There are still a few Muslim countries that have really high total fertility rates. The Palestinian territories are about somewhere between 3.5 and 4 children per woman. Pakistan is really, really high, somewhere in the 4 range. There's another one. There's a few other ones that are really high. But the bulk of Muslim countries, Yemen. Yemen is super high. It's 6. It's crazy. By modern standards, Yemen is a lot of children per woman in Yemen. But most Muslim countries are experiencing sort of declines in total fertility rates that look a lot like the West. So Egypt, right, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and a whole bunch of others are actually, Indonesia, Malaysia, actually have total fertility rates 1.3, 1.4. They look like low fertility societies now. So Muslim population growth in majority Muslim states is shrinking at a pretty sharp rate. What was it? My hashtag. Rodney Stark was right. As in all things, Saint Rodney of Stark has been proven correct, right? Now, the other thing that Stark says, which I think is a little bit more contentious, but I have to say it anyway, is he suggested that Christians have 2 sources of growth as compared to Muslims. Muslims, he says, principally grow through fertility. And he says Christians will have 2 sources of growth, which is both through fertility and conversion. And he said, well, some people do convert to Islam. Christianity seems to be a lot more effective at gaining converts, right? In places that sometimes you don't expect. For example, I bet you probably wouldn't guess that the fastest growing church in the world, right, with the most kind of people converting, is in a little country called Iran. It's underground, but it's happening, and there's lots of accounts suggesting that it's growing really quickly. And then Stark really believes strongly that China was converting to Christianity in major numbers too. Now, this I think is a little bit more disputed. He thought that by basically 2070, China, well, it wouldn't be majority Christian, would have the largest number of Christians of any country on earth, surpassing, I think the champion right now is Brazil. Anyway, all right, so that's Rodney Stark. Okay, so from Christian Smith, and I take this quote from the Bible specifically because Smith used it, from Luke 18:8. I wouldn't have known where to look for it, but it's one of the headers in Smith's, last chapter of his book, Religion, What It Is, How It Works, and Why It Matters. And Smith sort of asks, what will the fate of religion be in the long term, right? Will the religious resurgence, especially that happened, in the Muslim world, in India, in Africa, and in Asia, will that religious resurgence continue? So that was true in the last quarter of the 20th century. Will it continue, through the 21st century or something else? Or will secular culture overcome religion with skepticism, rationalism, and naturalistic science? So his conclusion is, and he says, or will religion survive but mutate dramatically under the pressure of technological change, globalization, and cultural evolution? All right, so he has some confident expectations. So some, if not many, though he thinks it's probably still most humans, will want to practice religion. A lot of it, he says, and I think this is important, I'm going to highlight it because it's fun. Different highlighter color, this time green. I love it. Oh no, it covers the text. Undo. How do I, that didn't work out at all. There we go. All right, apparently, I guess the text is kind of green, isn't it? Oh. All right, I know I'm wasting time, and you're like, stop wasting time. All right. Some will want low-intensity forms of religion, right? Overall, there's a lot of marginal religious people that want sort of religion, but not a lot of commitment, and that's going to continue. And some, and probably a minority, will want more intense and demanding religious systems. Smith suggests, humans will experience challenges, as they do today and as they always have, that they don't know how to deal with independently, and that they will want help with from superhuman powers, right? Forces they believe can affect the world. And many people will also want the secondary products of religion, right? They'll want identity, community, meaning, expression, aesthetics, ecstasy, control, and legitimacy of various kinds. And one of the things that he notes, and here I think, it's a good rejoinder to our buddy Steve Bruce, right, who said that religion is not, a part of the natural human condition, but a special product. Smith disagrees here and suggests actually a total secular existence is not a human default, right? And here, what he says is that it does happen. I'll answer your question in a sec. Let me get through my thought. It does happen, right? There are instances where, a secular existence has been true, but it only emerges in very specific social conditions. Mia.
Is this still Stark or
This is Smith. Smitty, my buddy Smitty. If he ever heard me call him that, I'm sure he'd be displeased. Smith. Smith. So, Rodney had a very different take in his last book called Why God, but we won't get into that because we have no time. All right, a total secular existence is not the default for human beings, right? In some circumstances, it does emerge, right? You could look at, say, the Soviet Union, right? Now, not a perfect example because obviously there was still religion in the Soviet Union, but, the society was essentially more or less entirely secular as long as it had a political system that basically prized that, right? Where being religious was a disincentive. Once the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, right, those social conditions changed. And what happened? Religion made a sort of comeback in Russia. Now, I don't think it's as extreme as some people think it is, but, right, the total secular existence, not a human default, it only emerges in certain social conditions. And Smith thinks, many humans will continue to practice religion for the foreseeable future. Okay, confident expectation. I love this one. Human beings will continue to generate new religions, right? We're going to continue to see new religious movements. springing up all the time. Most of them will fail, right? Most of them will fail, but they're happening now, right? I got stopped by the God is Mother people, the Korean church, just a couple weeks ago. There's new religious activity happening all the time, right? Most of it dies out. We talked about that. We talked about the rise of Christianity. Most of the new religions that are generated are going to fail. But new religions and new religious ideas are going to be generated. Existing religions are going to generate new sects of those religions, right? Islam is not done. Christianity is not done. They're going to generate new forms of religion that encounter late modernity in unique and interesting ways, right? Okay, for new religions, over time, one of these guys might become the next Mormons, right? They might go. And now, Mormonism, right, started in the 1820s and took about 150, 200 years to really become what we would think of as the youngest world religion, but it's definitely there today. So, maybe in your lifetime, one of these new religious systems that you're not even aware of because it hasn't hit critical mass yet, by the end of your life, you're going to think back on this class, probably not, and think like, wow, Professor Broussard, who's been dead for 80 years, was right. When am I dying? I don't know. Was right. I'm assuming you're going to live to be like 200. I'm hoping. It was right. And actually, the church of PewDiePie or the church of Mr. Beast did actually, in fact, grow to become a world religion, right? Okay, 4 minutes left. This one I think is really important. All living religions are going to be internally, qualitatively transformed over time, right? That should be 2 words, not one typo. Even so, though some of them, and think maybe here Roman Catholicism, will make claims to unchanging orthodoxy, right? They're going to, a lot of religions, and Catholics are notorious for this. It's like, we have I was going to bang this on the table, it's probably a bad idea. We have the unchanging faith that's been unchanged since the time of the apostles. Pooey, that's not true. All religions react to social conditions and change. Belief structures may stay quite similar, but it's not the same, religion as it was in 1 AD. Islam is not the same as it was, in 700. All religions qualitatively change over time as they respond to new social conditions, and that's going to continue to be the case for existing religions. Yeah, some religions will grow in size, strength, and significance while others decline. We've talked in this course, right? The mainline churches might disappear, while others, Islam, Mormonism, have grown in their size and influence and may continue to do so depending on the social conditions. Okay, I think this is my last slide. Last slide of the course, folks. Religion is going to continue to be a significant part of human societies, Smith says, as long as the human condition is like what it is now, right? So barring, Yuval Noah Harari's notion of like the Homo Deus, where we implant chips in ourselves and we fill ourselves with giraffe DNA to give ourselves extra long necks or whatever the fuck Yuval Noah Harari says. You never figure out what the hell that guy's talking about, but he seems very popular. His books are terrible, by the way. Homo Deus and Sapiens are both terrible books that are full of really stupid assumptions. But that's not the point of this class. My point is, as long as human beings are what we are now, right? We face challenges. We face health struggles. We face inequalities, injustice. Religion, Smith thinks, is going to be around because it answers something that seems inherent to the human condition. Though not all people need it or have it, not everyone's going to be religious, but religions will continue to answer some questions as long as the human condition stays kind of like what it is today, right? If we end up on Star Trek and we can replicate ourselves food all the time, maybe it goes away. Smith doesn't say that, but it's kind of what he means, right? In a post-scarcity world, maybe we don't need religion anymore. But, if the human condition stays like what it is, and we still die, we can't upload ourselves to Facebook and be in the Zuckerverse, we are going to need religion. In some circumstances it will be more powerful, in others less, but he thinks it's extremely unlikely that it will disappear entirely. I'm going to take my last minute to say one thing that I found really interesting because I reread this chapter yesterday to do these slides. One of the things that Smith says is that in some circumstances, some of the things that we think of as either making religion stronger or weaker can do both, right? And it's sort of like a light switch. And one of the things he says is that, one of the assumptions, if you remember, of secularization thesis was that religious pluralism weakens religion. And market theory, right, says that religious pluralism strengthens religion. And what Smith says is that those are both true in different social circumstances, right? That in, say, if we talk Churching of America, right, from that 1776 till 2005, religious pluralism seemed to really help, American religion, and it made it much stronger. After 2005, though, it actually seems that some of the religious pluralism fits more that secularization thesis because the social conditions change. So as social conditions change, some of the social factors may actually, that helped religion in the past, may hurt it, and vice versa. So, I'm done. I'm out of time. I did it. I got through everything. I am a real boy. No, I'm kidding. All right, that's it. Friday, Q&A, do some practice questions to just kind of show you what's on the exam. So basically, last third of the course, I'm trying to remember where we kind of started because I have no brain anymore. I'm like, is it the scarecrow that has no brain? I think so. I feel that way. Where did we?
The Churching of America.
Yeah, so basically, Churching of America through the future, and again, there's not much in the future. Boy, that's a lot of material. I'm really sorry. Like the last exam was 2 units, and this one is, like 5. But one of them's really short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. So yeah, Churching of America forward is all on the exam. 6 questions, double the time. Come back on Friday, ask your questions, and we'll move from there. All right. Yay. Course content over. Okay.